Good morning and welcome to Aviation Week Network's seminar this morning, our webinar on European Business Aviation Strategies for Recovery. We've all been hit pretty hard by the coronavirus, the COVID-19, and it's had a lot of impact on business aviation around the world, and especially in Europe, where lockdowns have been very severe, quarantines have been very severe. The reaction to the virus has had to be very severe. Business aviation, unlike the airlines, hasn't actually stopped flying while all this has been going on. The operations have been continuing, though perhaps at a very reduced rate and with a lot of difficulties. But in this time, business aviation has been proving its worth as essential aviation, as essential transportation. And it's been moving people, it's been repatriating people, it's been moving medical supplies, it's been connecting communities. It's been showing that business aviation really can play a very vital role and does play a very vital role in the transportation industry. Not everybody realizes that. What we've done today, we've brought together 4 leaders of European business aviation to discuss their experience, their insights, and their collective wisdom in looking not only at what's been going on, how people have been dealing with it, but more importantly, for most of the 1,000 people who are in our audience here today, across Europe and broader around the world as well, more importantly, what are strategies for recovery? What is recovery going to look like? How is it going to happen? And what can each of us and everybody in the industry do to help facilitate this? So I'd like to introduce, first of all, Robert Fish, who is President of Aviation Services at Lux Aviation. Hello, Robert.
Hello, John.
And Robert is, as I said, he is President of Aviation Services at Lux Aviation, which is one of the world's biggest, if not the biggest, aviation management and chartering companies. I'd like to introduce Ian Moore, who is Chief Commercial Officer for VistaJet, which is, I believe you describe yourself as perhaps the world's largest private aviation and services company with a massive fleet of Bombardiers, of Globals and Challengers that's kept on flying through the pandemic and can tell us about that. I'd like to introduce Athar Husain Khan, who is the Secretary General of the European Business Aviation Association. He has been spearheading the effort in Europe to talk to governments, to talk to regulators, to talk to decision makers about how to facilitate business aviation, how to keep it going, how it's going to keep going in the future, how it really can play its role, and what help it needs to be able to do this. And all of this is for the collective good. And he will talk about ongoing efforts there, what is achieved so far, and what else there is to do. And we talked to Adam Tuedel, who is the CEO of Private Fly, which is one of the world's largest, if not the largest, online brokerage for business aviation. And he will tell us what he's seen in terms of demand for business aviation, how demand has been changing, and how demand is going to be picking up as we head into recovery, where that demand will be coming from. So I'd like to give each of our speakers just a few minutes to talk about themselves and what they've been doing and where they're going. And if we could start with you, Robert.
So good afternoon from Luxembourg. So thank you first of all for the invitation. So my name is Robert Fish. I'm President of Aviation Services here at Lux Aviation Group. I joined Lux Aviation back in 2010 when we started with 1 airplane. And then since then we have been growing a bit. So in the last couple of weeks, last 10 weeks, I must say that during the lockdown period here in Europe, we could see the lockdown coming towards us, towards our region from looking at our Asian and Australian operation. We could see that the lockdown would be a possibility that we would face. Since then, I must say it has been extremely busy because we had to manage a lot of communication, but also take a lot of management decisions in the last couple of weeks to be able to go through this crisis and make sure that we keep also our tool functioning and ready to go whenever it's needed. We continued flying, as most of my colleagues here in the panel. So there have been some challenges, but luckily enough, I see now an increase again in demand. But I guess this is going to be done for later on, I suppose.
Okay, thank you, Robert, for that. Over to you, Ian.
Yeah, thanks, John. And it's great to be here. First of all, I've been working for VistaJet now for 10 years. I started in 2010. Feel like we've gone through a lot of different challenges over those years. This one's the most unique I think I've ever come across. And as a company, I think you mentioned us as being one of the largest. I think our aim is being the truly only global aviation provider. There's definitely companies bigger than us, but certainly we've had a rare perspective on these last sort of maybe 12 to 14 weeks worth of change around the world. And it's something Robert had mentioned as well. Our company, started off seeing early signs of what COVID was going to do with our China operation or our Asian operation. So we had some early warning signals as what could happen, and that's sort of flown through to now coming all the way through Europe and to the Americas. So, we've been really interested to see how the changes have come. I think March was a crazy time for private aviation flying, particularly if you had long-range aircraft. There just wasn't enough aircraft to be able to deal with the demand, moving people from continent to continent, getting people to their safe place. And I think April, was probably the lowest, I think, in terms of activity. Made sense. Everyone had got home. Everything was in a lockdown situation. I think that made sense, and every company in private aviation probably went into sort of as much a hibernation mode as possible. And I think pretty much every week in May so far, we've seen increase in demand. And what's been vital is, I think, not just the demand has remained solid, if not increasing, but the ability to actually do the flight has followed now as well. So we've been generally kept pretty positive just by that demand curve that's been moving up in May, and then it's moving into June as well.
Thank you, Ian. And Athar, you've been very busy. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. Welcome to everyone. I'm Athar. I'm the Secretary General of the EBAA, and we, based in Brussels, we present about more than 700 business aviation companies in Europe, and that includes the aircraft operators, FBOs, airports, manufacturers, and service providers. So what makes us unique as a trade association is that we actually represent the entire value chain. Me, myself, I've been in this job just over 1.5 years. I'm relatively new to this part of the industry, but I have been in aviation, commercial aviation, that is, for more than 20 years before this. I would also like my colleagues, Robert and Ian, to thank Aviation Week for the timely initiative, and looking forward to the discussion with everyone. It's a difficult time for the industry, and information sharing, certainly in my view, has never been more critical and prominent. Just a couple of words on where we are, John, because we will be discussing this at length, I would imagine, when we move further forward during the webinar. It is important to understand the impact of the crisis on the European business aviation sector. It has been severely impacted, like the rest of the chain. I think the industry has faced crises before, as many of you well know, but never on the, let's say, unprecedented scale of the COVID-19 as we are experiencing today. Let me just throw a couple of figures at you to give you a bit of context. We recently ran a survey amongst the CEOs of our membership, and that revealed that the financial losses due to the crisis are estimated between 50 and 90%. And almost 35% of the operators had to stop operating altogether. In April, just about a month ago, Eurocontrol in Europe observed a 70% decrease in business traffic overall compared to the same time last year. However, and I think I would echo what Ian and Robert has said as well, we are now seeing since the end of last month that there is a slight turnaround and upswing in market activity. Business aviation recently accounted for 20% of aircraft flying in Europe. 25% of those were attributed to medical missions. And again, I think it's good to echo that operators have continued to fly in the face of these restrictions and curfews and all the operational challenges that they had to counter with, to provide support to governments, health organizations, repatriation, and as such. So let me just leave it at that, John, for the introduction. Happy to go into more detail as we move through the next hour. Thanks very much.
Okay, Adam. Thank you, Adam. And Adam, over to you.
Good day, John. Well, I was learned to fly when I was at university, and I was lucky enough to make flying and aviation, which was a passion, into my career when I joined the Air Force. And after 10 years of flying military aircraft, I was again fortunate to be introduced into private aviation, and then had a few years of learning about our fantastic sector. And I guess armed with a little bit of information, being completely naive, I saw the opportunity to bring charter online with a platform. We called it Private Fly. We grew rapidly, expanded within Europe and then to the States. And more recently, we were acquired by Directional Aviation, who of course have many brands throughout private aviation. On the flying side, we have the elder sibling of FlexJet and Sentient, but Private Fly for now firmly sits in the on-demand charter sector.
Okay, thank you. Now, having just had a brief introduction with everybody, perhaps we could ask the audience to take a first poll. We have 2 or 3 polls lined up for today. So, now the first poll we will ask the audience is, how soon will business aviation recover to pre-crisis levels? Perhaps if you can select one of the following: 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, or more than 2 years. I'm very interested to see what the answers are. I'm just going to say this webinar is being recorded and will be available within the next 24 hours. You can find this on aviationweek.com under the webinar series. We already have answers here for the quick poll. What we have here, it's somewhat optimistic, somewhat realistic, perhaps a bit of both. Our panelists will tell us, but it seems 22% of our participants think 6 months to recovery, which is fairly quick. That's encouraging. 35% think within a year, 25% think it'll take 2 years, and just 18% think it'll take more than 2 years. So as soon as we come back to the panelists, we will ask comments, please. If you can wade in, what do you think of that for answers to a poll? Who would like to start?
Okay, I can start. Very interesting. I think it's telling that it's quite an even spread, really. I think this is such unprecedented times, it's difficult to gauge. I'm leaning towards more, and our company's leaning towards more the 6-month mark. We feel at VistaJet, we're maybe the eternal optimist at the best of times anyway, so maybe that's just still carrying on with our way of thinking. But there could be a fair bit of consolidation that comes into the market. I think demand for private jets, we're seeing it both on a digital platform, but also in a sort of an analog world, that there's a lot of interest in private aviation. I think there was a report not long ago put out by McKinsey that only 10% of people that can afford to fly privately do so. So that just shows you that there's a lot of money out there that isn't flying privately. And I think the recent COVID situation will result in a new batch of people coming to private aviation. So that's why we are more confident in a 6-month turnaround. Saying that though, what the market will look like and how long people can endure even a 6-month turnaround, which would be still a very, very quick period of time given what's happened, that could be what really shapes the business and the industry for the next 5 to 10 years. So will there be amalgamations of companies, mergers, acquisitions, changes in shift of what direction each company wants to focus on? I think it's going to be a very interesting next 6 to 12 months anyway. But I think I've said this before now in our practice run. Private aviation's always been the first in a recession and the last one out. I think these situations and what's actually happened mean that we could be the first one out due to the fact, just the unique nature of the virus and what that's done with way people will travel in the future. So that's why we're optimistic. But I think the even spread of the poll just tells you that we're all in uncharted territory here.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else, or I'll ask questions?
John, I think the interesting thing when we're trying to see what's going to happen is to look at the data that is in front of us. And at Private Fly, we've seen some really interesting trends. Well, first of all, the good news that the demand is absolutely there. In fact, the number of flight inquiries that we've received is higher than last year. So we know people want to fly. People are interested in using private aviation. And many of them are doing it for the very first time. Over the last year or so, our customers, 25% of them have been new, 75% of them have been returning to Private Fly for their second or more flight. Now, as the coronavirus hit at the beginning of the year, we started seeing that the people who were booking flights were the first-time customers. It started to increase from that 25%. It went up to 65% last month, and now 70% we're running at are new customers. And this is not just seen in the charter world. This is seen in jet cards as well. So it's tremendously exciting for the industry that we've got an opportunity now. We know the demand is there, and we know we've got a real ability to showcase the industry to many new clients.
So this new demand, it seems, is coming without you having to advertise, without you going out there and shaking the tree for customers. Should you be doing more? Should the industry be doing more to capture this pent-up demand? For example, if I want to rent a jet, how do I know who to go to? Where do I turn to? Should there be more proactivity from the industry right now to capture this?
Well, I think, John, if I can come in?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, coming from whether or not the market will recover, in a couple of months or a couple of years, and whether the industry has a role to do that. I mean, that I think is from an EBAA perspective probably a bit difficult to predict, and I'm going to leave that up to the market to decide. What I can say is shed some light on the fact that what we are doing more than anything is exactly highlighting the flexibility and the adaptability and the agility, particularly of this industry in the current situation, and why I think in line with what Ian was just saying, business aviation is ideal position to be that first mover when we move into normal territory. We're already doing that as we are as an industry today, and we continue to do that as we move further forward. Whether it's as repatriation, market increase, stuff like still medical flights with respect to COVID and other things, it'll still be very much a business aviation industry, which will be responsible for connecting regional, connecting hubs, connecting internationally, etc. I mean, this is an industry we're talking about which connects 3 times as much city pairs in Europe than commercial airlines do. We connect 1,500 airports in Europe as opposed to 500 by the commercial guys. So there's a lot of added value of this industry. And I think more and more, certainly we are seeing at the regulatory and policy side, the appreciation and acceptance of that. I think that's one of the key things certainly that we've been pushing for as EBAA.
If I could just come to you on that, Athar, because the regulatory policy legislation, this is going to be vital, is it not, for recovery? What are you doing really to make sure that it works for business aviation? And what do you actually require? What is going to be needed in the months to come?
Well, I mean, I think as EBAA, we've tried to really take a leadership role to support our membership, but the European business aviation community as a whole. On the inside, with respect to the industry itself, we have started off initially by providing all kinds of real-time verified operational safety guidelines. We set up a resource center on our website indicating all kinds of very valuable information for the membership to actually survive the initial hits of the pandemic. As I said just now, helping shape the rules for the safe reopening of air travel, pushing very hard on European regulators and national authorities to open up the borders, lift the curfews, and again using as an argument the added value that business aviation provides to society and the fact that business aviation always have and is continuing to operate healthily and safely through this pandemic. I think what is interesting as well is that we have been able to secure a couple of essential wins, like the deferral of ATC charges, releasing some of the financial pressure on our membership, extending the validity of pilot licenses. And I think what we're really proud of is just last week, the inclusion of business aviation specificities and operations in the latest EASA health and safety procedures. So we're pushing very much with that on a regulatory level. I think what is important now as we move forward is that we feel that this business aviation industry is ideally positioned to help define a new era of flight, because we have shown and have a track record of doing what we are today safely. So we want to be the catalysts and drivers. But what we need, picking up on your remarks, John, what we need is a harmonized and inclusive European approach, standardization of measures and regulation at European level to ensure efficient, safe and business-friendly framework for us to operate. Another thing on the regulatory side, we are pushing for the deferral and delay of non-essential regulatory and legislative proposals, because we do not feel that the industry is ready to pick those up, and we don't think that there is any urgent need to pursue those at the moment. So it's quite a bag of measures and things that we are arguing, advocating, and pushing for. But this kind of gives you a bit of a flavor as to what we are doing.
Arthur, if I could just add one more thing there. I think you're actually being very modest about the achievements of EBAA, because your timing last year, launching the campaign Expanding Horizons, was in retrospect just so perfect. EBAA have done a huge amount of work to change the perception of private aviation. And wow, what a time to do it, just as we're trying to get that message out to all of our customers and new ones. I think we should really praise EBAA's foresight with this campaign.
Well, thanks very much for that, Adam.
Is there more that your membership could be doing to help you, do you think, with this? Because as Adam said, it's a huge task. Is there more that members could be doing individually in support of your efforts, or are they all too preoccupied with their own situation at the moment?
I know that, John, I think it's a combination. Of course, they are preoccupied, and rightly so. They have business to run. They need to survive. They need to make sure that they have a future. Their companies have a future. Their staff have a future. The industry has a future. So there's all kinds of sympathy and empathy for the fact that the industry is preoccupied, and it should be. And that's not our role. Our role is to support them as much as we can, by giving them all the latest information, all the updates, so that they can operate and run their businesses as smoothly as possible. In addition to that, we can help them at the regulatory level, which we are doing. What would help us is obviously get us as much information as we can from our industry partners, because that helps us advocate and lobby on their behalf talk to the media, people like yourselves, John, and your company, but others here in Brussels and at national regulatory level. The more examples we get of what the industry is doing, the more examples we get of what the operational restrictions and curfews are that they are running into, the better and the more substantive we can be in lobbying. I think picking up on Adam's point just now, and I'm happy he raised it, under the Expanding Horizons campaign and very recently, we have indeed put a lot of effort and resources into changing the image and the perception of business aviation as an industry. What we're doing currently throughout the crisis, on a weekly basis, we are highlighting very inspiring stories of our members, particularly when it comes to medical relief, repatriation, and health patients' flights. Also to highlight to society as a whole that there is a very empathetic, supportive part of business aviation that sometimes isn't always recognized. So again, it's quite a mixed bag of a lot of activities and things that are going on. But any information from our membership, coordination with our membership, getting a lot of input and feedback from them is what keeps us ticking and performing. Thanks.
So to all our panelists then, please contact Athar, tell him what you're doing, give him the good story. Yes, definitely do that.
Well, if I can just add one thing, because there's one victory of EBAA that is not celebrated enough, and that happened actually at the beginning of this year, and some of my colleagues here were part of it. That was the proposed amendment regarding flight time limitations. I know that this is going to be technical, but this was a fight to get that amendment pushed back. If that amendment would have gone through, business aviation, as it is known at the moment in Europe, would not be able to exist anymore. That means that day return flights would not have been possible anymore. So, and I think this is something that is sometimes forgotten. This was, I think, a very big victory for the EBAA, and I can only say thank you to the colleagues who were also part of it. And this is sometimes forgotten. I think this was now worth mentioning.
I think it's very important to realize that business aviation doesn't just exist by itself. It must have a voice. And I think Athar's doing a very, very good job with that. I want to ask you, Robert, so we talked a bit yesterday about the new order in the new world. You think it might not be quite so new order. It might be more of the same, but more of it. Can you elucidate? Can you elaborate on that?
Well, if you look at the poll that we just had, it shows actually quite a few interesting movements, because there's not one that is prevailing to the other. So if we go back to the last big crisis, 2007, 2008, once the crisis hit us in 2008, 2009, we basically divided the movements of business aviation by 3. It took less than a year to increase it by 50% again. So between that was 2009 to 2010, we doubled the movements. So that's why it's going to be in 6 months. That's going to be an interesting to see or not. I don't know. But I think why I say that it's more of the same is that business aviation, as we have known it at the moment in Europe, is going to remain as it is. But are we ready to have new entrants in our market? Let's say that Adam talked about it earlier, is new customers. Are we ready for new customers? Do we have the offer to attract new customers? I'll give you an example. Just before the crisis, I was meeting a client in Paris in one of the big palaces. So since I was a little bit early, I was looking a little bit at people who were coming in and out, and there was a couple who was absolutely the model of the people who are using business aviation, except for the baggage tag. When they were checking in, their baggage tag was the tag of a low-cost carrier. And I thought, what are we doing wrong? They have the budget to spend their journey, but we are not part of their journey. So there is something that we are not doing right at the moment. I think that now we have a unique opportunity, given that we have now a sense of fear, let's call it by name, that people do not necessarily want to go to a terminal, or that they don't want to enter a crowded aircraft. So those will be new people, new customers, new clients, new possibilities. Do we have the correct offer for that? So that's why I think that it's going to be more of the same, but also with a new added amount of customers. And that's why I think that we're going to have a very interesting future for Europe. Now, this future is only possible if we have the voice, if we are able to democratize business aviation, and we get it into people's mind. We change it from private aviation to business aviation. If people start to look at it more as a tool, then it starts also to become more acceptable. And I have still that sensation that it is not fully accepted yet in our European minds, not as in the US. In the US, it's a pure business tool for most of the people. Here, we are not there yet. So I think that's why we're going to have more of the same, yes, but with a touch of brand new customers if we are able to interest them in our business.
So does democratization really mean, in code, lower prices? Or is there more to it in democratizing business aviation?
If we go back to 2008, when Private Fly launched, one thing that we wanted to do with the other online brokers and platforms that joined the market, we wanted to make pricing transparent to the customer. We knew that charter in many routes was the most cost effective, but still customers didn't want to enter it because it was an unknown quantity. So we took that challenge on and we delivered pricing. Now, of course, that had some effect on the prices. But as we look into this crisis, I wonder if our attention should be more about the quality of the service and educating our customers about what actually happens. Our customers have always taken some things for granted, perhaps the pilot's qualifications, what happens at the FBO. But now we're going to have a lot more inquisitive customers coming out of this corona crisis. They're going to want to understand, how many people am I going to be interacting with throughout the journey? Where have the pilots flown to? So I think we have to be ready for that. I think we have to open up the education process, and that's reliant on all of the companies, but also on our industry association and continuing the excellent work that EBAA and MBA have been doing. So a lot of this, I think, is not just about price, but it's about the quality of what we offer.
Ian, you might say that you can't really offer very much more quality, it's already there. So what can you do? Does it come down to more efficiency? And I know you're really pushing that with trying to reduce empty legs, all sorts of other efficiencies while maintaining quality. How far can you squeeze this?
Yeah, well, to go back to your original point on pricing, I really don't think that, I think private aviation or business aviation, whatever name you want to give it, I think from a pricing perspective is really spread depending on the opportune time that a person wants to fly to when you factor in what the true cost is. So I don't think dropping prices is really the aim. I don't think the industry will need to. I think in most cases, flights are breaking even. So I don't think there's as much room for price to go down. But I think where the business will go, and a business like ours, where we have a floating fleet spread around the world, is just to find more customers closer to where that aircraft lands on its previous flight. So the more people that come in to the industry will benefit everyone on this call. And I think that's going to be a great thing. The more chance that you can lower your empty legs or your ferry legs, I think when you own a fleet of aircraft like VistaJet does, that's crucial. 1 or 2 percentage points make a huge difference to your profitability in that day. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the industry is going to look like. I think if you ask the question, where does commercial look and what effect does that have on the business aircraft? I think that's going to be the really interesting thing. If you are seeing 3 times as many city pairs pre-COVID, what's that going to look like in Europe, in 6 months' time? How long is it going to take commercial airlines to get past doing, say, from London to Zurich, what's going to be the connectivity of other city pairs of commercial airlines, and that's where the business aviation sector can pick up that immediately. So I think straight away there's going to be a working between commercial scheduled airlines and the business aviation network together. So no, as a chief commercial officer, I'd be out of a job if I was talking about lowering prices. But I agree with Adam. I think educating the market here of what we're actually providing, the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. I always talk about our company, figured that we're the swan in the water and the feet are working feverishly hard, and that's over 1,000 employees making this flight work, but the flight needs to be as smooth as the water that the swan's on. So we really need to work incredibly hard as an industry to explain to our customers what they're actually buying. And they're buying a lot more than just the champagne on board the aircraft. And I think that's what we're going to see migrate towards business aviation now. It's not just going to be, do you fly privately in a private jet, but it's going to be all those minimized touch points and the safety record of the pilots and the actual operation itself, all factored into one bundle of a service. So I'm hopeful that's where the new entrants will come into, not into a low, how can I get the cheapest empty leg, but more so looking at, I'm putting my family on it. It's the reason why I'm not flying commercially now. I want to investigate and go to the quality operators there that I know that are investing money in my safety, not just in the air, but on the ground as well. So no, I think it's a great opportunity for us as an industry to lift our socks up and really present what we do best. And maybe that's where we all need to work together to identify exactly what goes on when you're committing to a flight. And over the last couple of months, we've seen an incredible amount of work of our operations teams putting one flight together, but maybe putting 10 flight plans together. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes before the customer gets to their aircraft. And that's what we need to identify over the next couple of months.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I'd like to take another poll here, ask our audience to answer another couple of questions. So we're asking here, which sector do you think will recover first? Will it be long-range jets or will it be small to medium jets? So while the poll is in progress, I'll remind you once again that the webinar is being recorded and you will be able to find it on aviationweek.com under the webinar series within the next 24 hours. So as soon as we have the answers here, we'll be back to our panelists. So here we are. It's interesting. 23% of our panelists think long-range jets will recover first. 77% think it'll be small to medium jets. And that is interesting because the market for new jets over the last few years, since the last recession basically, has been more for long-range jets than for the smaller ones. So perhaps, who'd like to address that first?
Well, if I can jump in with some data.
You go.
Thanks, Ian. Traditionally, over the last year, 18% of our flights have been long haul on large cabin aircraft. And over the last 2 months, that's jumped up to 34%. So the demand is there for long haul flights, and indeed some cases, ultra long haul flights. We took a passenger from London to Auckland, probably one of the longest journeys you can do. And he was a first-time private jet user. So there's an example of somebody who's coming to our sector for the very first time and entering at a very high level. So I would say don't discount that demand for long-haul flying.
Yeah, thank you, John. I think one of the things that I think is going to be more and more important as we move forward, and again, it's up to the market to decide. But we will certainly expect that the traveling public and the potential new customers for business aviation are going to be more and more, let's say, critical of what the industry provides. And I mean, both Ian, Robert, and Adam are much better versed than I am to indicate what kind of quality of service they provide to the customer throughout the journey. But I do believe that as we move forward, and certainly something we're seeing here in Europe, that sustainability, innovation, and things like that are going to be much more prominent in the minds of the customer as we move forward. I think as an industry, it's always easy to point at regulators or at regulations or at politicians and saying that they're not doing a good job and that they need to help us, certainly in times that we are in now. But there is a responsibility, I think, for the industry itself as well, to ensure that it is really that innovative and sustainable as it claims to be, whether it's in aircraft, fuselage design, engine behavior, sustainable aviation fuels, or probably a bag of mixed things. If we want to really get new customers on board, retain them, and also be an attractive proposition as an industry for the, let's say, younger generation, we will need to focus on that as well, not just to give them jobs in this industry and retain them, but certainly also to have them as new customers and passengers on board. So I think that's maybe a slightly more holistic approach to this question, but it is certainly going to play a role in the future, we would expect.
If demand picks up, as some people think it might, is there enough aircraft capacity in the charter markets to take care of demand? And if so, how much demand can it absorb?
Well, I think in general, because it's such a fragmented market in general, what will be interesting to see over the next 6 to 12 months is how much of that owner release aircraft or capacity will come back, whether it's in Europe, the US, or beyond. And that's one of the things that we at least saw in March, was a lot of aircraft globally were taken off the market as owners were keeping them for themselves, which, you know, as explained before, like an Airbnb, I think, you know, these aircraft were put into the marketplace, making up a big bulk of the supply in the industry of owner-released aircraft. So it'd be very interesting to see what the next 6 to 12 to 18 months will do with the supply in the industry, whether there'll be the owner-led or operator-led approaches versus maybe the fragmented owner aircraft management availability come back to the marketplace. That will really impact what will happen with pricing and availability. I think in general, if that returns to pre-COVID, then yeah, I think there is definitely enough supply in the marketplace to deal with it. But if a lot of those aircraft do not come back and are kept for their owners, then yeah, you might have a shortage and therefore the pushing up in price. The traditional issue with European flying in general is that there's such specific peaks and troughs. So there's certain weeks in, you know, late January or in April or even in October, November, where there's, you know, there's way too many aircraft, and then you get into August or over Easter period or half term in February, and there's just not enough aircraft in the world to be able to deal with it. So, you know, what we're continually trying to do at VistaJet is trying to find a customer base that can give us, you know, it's a holy grail, but to give us 365 days a year of coverage. And that's what the industry lacks at the moment. There's probably not as much depth in Europe yet. It's catching up, but what there is in the US, for example, which seems to have, you know, even in their quiet times, it would match most regions' busy days.
Interestingly, the barrier to growth in Europe hasn't always been about the supply of aircraft. We've generally, apart from on a few peak days in the year, the Monaco Grand Prix, the Champions League final, we've always had enough aircraft. The barrier to growth has been airport access and slots. And I think when the airlines get back on their feet, that problem will come back to us unless we put private aviation firmly on the agenda. Airports love private aviation during the bad times. We'd be welcome at Heathrow any day this week. But when they recover, we're often forgotten. And I think, especially for those major events in the calendar, often private aviation isn't part of the planning process, and we absolutely must be.
Well, that's over to Athar again, is it not? And membership support for EBAA to speak with a common voice.
Can you hear me? Yeah, they're all very, very valid points, and I would agree with Adam. Business aviation has no issues or problems at all today accessing or departing from any kind of infrastructure in Europe, even the very congested hub airports where it's very, very difficult to get in when the market behaves in a normal way in normal times. So I'm just taking this inside out at face value. We're happy with the opportunities that business aviation has now to access that condensed and limited infrastructure. But on a much more fundamental view, we need to review and revamp the slots regulation at European airports sooner rather than later, and promote business aviation and move them further up the ladder when slots are allocated to airlines and operators. There are all kinds of ways that we can do this. There are some good examples across the world, including in Europe, but it is indeed a very difficult battle, and it's been a battle which has gone on for decades. When I was in commercial airlines, I actually was one of the lobbyists who advocated very successfully to keep business aviation out of the slot regulation and very far down the priority line. And I'm actually advocating exactly the opposite. So it's a rough battle out there. And as Adam said, today we're the big friends of many of the big hub airports, dying and screaming for market. And once that returns and all the big hub airlines go back in, we're pushed out. And that is something that it's very high on our target and priority list at EBAA. And once again, please contact us, use us to advocate on your behalf as well. So we'll be picking that up gradually. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's very good to hear. Now, you did mention, especially Adam and Ian, that this is going to be a time for opportunity as the recovery comes back in. But we heard from Athar that from the CEO survey, 35% of those CEOs surveyed said that they had ceased operations altogether. It doesn't sound like very much opportunity for them. How are they going to get through it? And secondly, there was the question there in the background of mergers and acquisitions. Are we likely to see the bigger companies perhaps picking up capacity, picking up assets from those that cannot make it at the moment? Is anybody going to answer that one?
I can give it a shot. I mean, in terms of M&A, I think it's natural. I think even before COVID hit us, I think there was already movements going back and forth across Europe and the US in particular about where the synergies between companies. I think it makes sense. As I mentioned earlier, very fragmented industry, so there's always ripe for more M&A. Obviously, having a hibernation period of sorts will put cash flow at the top of the agenda for every CFO of any aviation company right about now. So dependent upon how quickly your operation is able to get back and flying at profitable rates will be important. There's a lot of marginal cost pricing in the charter market at the moment. So yeah, there's some cash flow coming in for companies, but they're certainly not covering all their costs. So that will take time before it comes through, and that will put some companies in worse position than others. So that will create M&A opportunities as well. So yeah, it is going to be a time for innovation. It's exciting for the industry to be a part of that, and I think we're all going to be at the front and center of being able to try and get in front of these new customers and make sure that they stay with the industry for now and ever more. But at the same time, I think it's not a bad time to be looking across the industry and seeing who can work together and who cannot. Because as I said, you really, with such fragmentation, you have opportunity, and I think now is probably the best opportunity you'll have with companies that may have suffered a little bit more than others over this period. And you know, we sort of move over relatively quickly what April and sort of half May has done. But if you're in a light jet operation, for example, in March, there wasn't much flying around Europe at the same time. So we could be looking up to 3 months, potentially 3.5 months of 20% of your usual capacity flying, and that puts a big strain on any company in any industry. And you're seeing that every single day when you open the Financial Times. So I think there will be challenges for companies to continue operating, not just in the next couple of weeks, but what that impact will have over for the next 6 months. And that will therefore create opportunities and conversations that I think are being held probably today and will continue to be held over the summer. And we may see a different industry when we come into October, November.
And if I could speak as an entrepreneur who's recently been acquired and seen all the benefits of it, I think it's an excellent time. If you're a company which is struggling with cash flow, struggling with how you're going to compete with competitors after this, there's going to be a lot of extra cost coming in to our business. And when you get to scale, you can absorb those costs so much easier. But the one thing I think the traveling private jet user will really want is the trust of larger brands. This is a moment that they want to rely on someone who's been there for a while and is trusted. And as a smaller player in the industry, it's going to be increasingly hard. So the benefits of joining a larger group are certainly the opportunity to take the brakes off what you would have been hesitant about doing. You can increase your risk. This is an excellent time for a young entrepreneurial company to be acquired and to be given a shot of steroids from a larger partner to be able to really go and do what they've always wanted to but been inhibited back. So I don't think this is a bad time. This is a great time for M&A opportunities.
To add maybe something to what Ian and Adam said on the future, maybe on how our business aviation on this side of the world may be looking. And this was already pre-COVID-19. You see, there was already an evolution. I think that will have probably two different kinds of company. One who is specifically doing charter and who have the flexibility to do so, and need to have a full flexibility and availability of the aircraft, and the others who are gonna be more into the management of the aircraft. Combining both together is gonna be more and more difficult. We heard earlier, Ian, that some of the customers do not give the airplanes anymore out for charter. I can only relate to that. I can understand that. But if you do not have anymore the capacity out for the charter, then the broker is not going to be interested anymore in you. So that's why I think that we're going to see there an evolution, and there might be the split between those who are specifically doing only charter and then those who are going more into the management. So we see it also internally with the split of our flight hours, so which ones are done commercially and which ones are done privately, and the private part is increasing on our side.
Yeah, I think, John, I see our role in supporting these kind of movements in the industry. Obviously, at EBAA, it's not our role to facilitate as such, but we do need to provide kind of the environment that these kind of activities in the industry and in the market can take place. And I think that's one of the things that we are focusing on in support of the membership and the industry, is to ensure that there is, let's say, a harmonized rule and acceptance and coordination at European level. And I think one of the things that we are slightly concerned about as we move forward is that it kind of picks up on Adam's point about the slots, that there might be some discrimination against some of the airspace users. Although the European Commission is very clear about the fact that we should have a non-discriminatory and level playing field in the single market. I think another thing which hasn't really been touched on so far, we distinctly at EBAA include regional and secondary airports in our advocacy and lobbying activities, because we are of the opinion that they play a vital role in the business aviation industry for our operators, FBOs and others. in that industry. So in addition to what my three colleagues on the panel were just saying about the market behavior and whether we would move into consolidation, M&A, and anything else, we're certainly trying to play our role in facilitating to the best of our ability that market indeed can behave in the way it thinks fit for the future.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'd like to wrap up the webinar very shortly, but before we do, I would just like to ask all four of you, any words of wisdom or advice for the industry as a whole that it can take forward into the next several months?
Sure. Business aviation is an enabler. It is not a perk. And that's one of the things I think that as an industry, we should be advocating much more viciously and vigorously when we talk to each other, but also when we talk to regulators and to the media.
Adam?
I'd like to repeat some words of wisdom from Ken Ritchie when he addressed the One Sky family this morning. Ken talked about stress and about stressing about the things that you can change, but not stressing about the things that you can't. And I guess it's a bit like an Olympic athlete going on to do the 100-meter race. At that point, you can't change how your competitors, or indeed in our case, the economy is going to perform. We just don't know so many things. But what we do know is that we've got a huge opportunity now to get our fantastic messages out to new customers and returning customers to make them use private aviation more. So let's seize the opportunity, let's be positive, and let's not worry about those economic things which are really outside of our control.
Thank you. And Robert, words of wisdom?
Wisdom is an interesting word by itself. But as said before, we should not, first of all, we should be thankful for our customers, for our clients, if they continue to use that superb tool. So let's not forget from who we are living. They have supported us all this year, growth and so on, and many we go back generations. So and multiple acquisition of airplanes and helicopters. And for that, I can only say thank you. But that means also that we need to be able to welcome new customers. Now, having said that, looking away from the customer, our part of aviation needs also to have a brush up on new technologies. We need to reach out to the OEMs and discuss some new possibilities. It cannot be that we are using only the same airports as airlines. We need also to be able to go to 1,000-meter runways. If you look at Geneva, Geneva is one airport. If you look at around Geneva Lake, you have half a dozen airports who have a 1,000-meter runway. So that would open suddenly a completely new spectrum of possibilities. So we should not share only the 852 airports that have commercial traffic right now on the European continent. So, and I give the rest of the time to Ian. I'll say I'm gonna go over a bit of time. But again, I think that we need to be ready and face some of the changes that are going to come in. And in the last 2 decades, each crisis has brought us also a new bunch of rules, be it security. The next one was a much in-depth side on safety. Maybe the next set of rules is going to be about salubrity. We're going to find out.
Okay, thank you. And Ian, words of wisdom from you.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom there, so I haven't got too much more to add. The one thing I would say, I've been working with the VistaJet group for 10 years now, and the one thing I've always seen as a group is always seen as a real positive when any crisis seems to occur. I think the way in which you can turn a crisis into an opportunity and has been, you know, you always see the winners of a crisis about 3 years after the fact, right? And so I think really our industry and the people within the industry have an opportunity now to look at what didn't work before. We are going to see an increased interest in what we do. That's a rare thing. You can spend millions and millions of dollars in marketing, but I really think that we've got all the unique selling points as an industry to really to be in a perfect place to supplement what was previously a commercial airline dominated space. So, you know, this is, I would love to see everyone in the industry working together to see how we can really evolve. because this crisis is once in hopefully 1 in 100 years. But it gives us a real opportunity to work together to really grow our industry and put it in the perfect place, which is where it should be. It shouldn't be seen as a perk, as Athar said. It's really a functional way of traveling, and we feel that we're part of our customers' lives and have been for many, many years. And this crisis, I think, will just strengthen those relationships and hopefully bring some new people to the industry.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Athar, and thank you, Adam. I think we've found there's a lot of optimism, a lot of scope for opportunity, and also the need for coordinating and combining a voice to protect and nurture the environment in which business aviation has to operate within Europe and the rest of the world. So I'd say thank you very much, and perhaps we can do this again in 6 months' time.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
In person next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.